Hey there, internet friends. Trevor Starkey here with another episode of Movie Monday. Today I'm going to dive into a spoiler-filled version of my Justice League review. If you want to see the spoiler-free version, you can check that video out in the description below from last Thursday after initially seeing it. I went ahead and attended it again today, so I would have, fresh thoughts on the film and see how it holds up on a second viewing. So, without further ado, let's dive into my thoughts. So a lot of the stuff I said in my spoiler-free version still carry over. I think the film overall is very disjointed, especially in the first half to two-thirds of it. It's having to do a lot of legwork because DC really tried to kind of jump the gun and play catch-up, and so as a result, we've got the team-up movie here without having introduced three of the players. So in the first half hour of the movie, you're jumping from Metropolis to Gotham, back to Metropolis, back to London, to Scandinavia, to the Bat Plane, to Central City, to Star Labs, to Themyscira, to Paris, to Metropolis, and to Cyborg's house, and then the Bat Cave. And that's all in the first half hour of the film, because you're having to, check in on the people that we left off with in Batman vs. Superman, Batman v Superman, and we're having to see a bit of The Flash and Aquaman and Cyborg, and we're having to get introduced to those characters. So the first chunk of the movie is very much putting all those pieces into play in a way that we wouldn't have had to do if they had each had like standalone movies or something like that. There's one image in the opening chunk of the film that stood out to me the first time I saw it, and it stands out again here, and that is during the very Zack Snyder-esque slow-motion musical montage opening credits kind of sequence. We see a homeless man with a sign that says, "I tried." And that struck me the first time around as, is that Zack Snyder speaking to the audience? Is that Joss Whedon speaking to the audience? Or is it just a homeless man with an "I tried" sign? But it struck me as it could be either one of them saying, "Hey, I know people don't like what this is. I know people don't like what we've done, but I tried." And it struck with me, and I'm sure that's not the intent, but that's certainly what I read into that moment in kind of the initial pass at it. But going back even further, the film opens on a very, very weird note with cell phone footage of these kids doing a quote-unquote podcast to Superman before the events of Batman v Superman. And Superman's out there, and he's answering these kids' questions, and it's just very awkwardly shot. There's a lot of weird pauses where Superman just kind of looks off to the side and says nothing for a few seconds and then answers the question. And it just, pacing wise, it feels out of place. One of the things I'm going to touch on here, because friends who have seen the movie make a huge deal out of it, is the film kind of notoriously went back in for a lot of reshoots, and one of the issues with the reshoots was Henry Cavill had a mustache on for another film that he was doing, and he wasn't allowed to shave it off for this. And so basically Warner Brothers spent millions of dollars to CGI out his mustache. I had forgotten about that the first time I saw it. Didn't bother me at all during the filming. I didn't notice it. There are certain moments where Henry Cavill looks like CGI-y and plasticky, but there are certain moments where everybody in this film looks that way. So it didn't stand out to me. And so this time through, I was specifically looking for it. And there are really only a couple moments where it really stood out to me, and that was looking specifically for it the entire film. I think it's being overblown, and people are kind of making a bigger deal out of it than it really is, because they know about it, and so psychologically they're looking for it, and it just didn't stand out any more so than all the other CGI that litters this film. Moving ahead, there's the sequence in London that introduces Wonder Woman and shows us that she's back to kind of fighting crime, which we saw a little bit at the end of Wonder Woman. Here she's facing off against random terrorist groups just to kind of establish that she is active again. And it's It's bad dialogue is it like that's where I made the note. I took notes as I was watching it the second time through, and the note I took there is bad dialogue, and it's very Zack Snyder-y, and Zack Snyder is not great with dialogue. He's great with imagery. Dialogue is not his strong suit, and so when you have like the terrorists saying like "I don't believe it" or whatever, and Diana responding back "I'm a believer," it's just like that's what that. Nobody talks like that, and if they did, everybody else is like, what? So, like, there's a lot of that. That's one example of it, but all throughout this film, there are moments like that that are, like, super on the nose, and I kind of, as I was driving home, I was like, I feel like for at least more than half of this film, the dialogue, if I just focus on the dialogue, my eyes will be, like, locked, rolled up in my head, because it's just not this film's strong suit. This film is fun when it gets to action and when it gets to letting these characters be freer than they have been in this world so far, and in moments like that, that's not what they're doing there. Also, we have that scene unnecessarily kind of introducing this weird set of abilities, again, because they look cool, not necessarily because of how they will play into the rest of the film. So Diana can suddenly move like super quick and just kind of like she's basically the Flash in that sequence, but with like bulletproof gauntlets. And I don't get that. I don't know how that serves the story outside of, hey, remember Diana is doing Wonder Woman again. If you missed Wonder Woman and thought she was just back in hiding. There are a handful of times in the film where it seems to deliberately forget that it's set up that Bruce knows who all these other heroes are, most notably here when he goes to see Aquaman, and he's basically talking with Aquaman standing right in front of him, who he has seen in a long, lingering camera shot in that video that Lex had, and he's talking about him as if he's not there, as if he, needs somebody else to go get him, and then he'll give them the money that he's, offering or something like that. And so it's just, again, weird dialogue choices that seem to be in defiance of what has already been established from this universe. Eventually we get to Themyscira, and we get our first introduction of Steppenwolf, who is entirely CGI, and this is where I'm kind of going to go on a little bit of a rant about the CGI in this film. There are certain moments in this film that look fine, but there are so many others that look underpolished and undeveloped and just unnatural. And we get that almost entirely with Steppenwolf. He never looks real. He just always looks like a plastic computer-generated person on screen. We never get to see any kind of like real sense of him existing in this world with all these other characters. He always seems apart because of the CGI. And I think a chunk of that comes down to they didn't get lighting right in a lot of these sequences. Most notably, it stood out to me when the team is trying to get together and they're talking in the Batcave, and they're very clearly on a green screen set, and there's lighting in the Batcave that does not at all reflect the lighting that is on these characters' faces or behind them or whatever the light source is coming from. And it takes you out of the moment if nothing else is keeping you in the moment, and when the other option is dialogue that is, makes me cringe a little bit. Seeing stuff like that, I'm just like, oh god, that, like, it looks fake, and I focus on why it looks fake, and that's where I land. I'm harping on a lot of negatives. I will get to the positives that I think exist in this film in a little bit. The problem is they don't really hit until halfway through the third act for me. There's enough there that just kind of makes me continue and be like, okay, I'm gonna get through this. It's not so bad that I ever want to get up and leave or walk away from the film, but it's not as good as it could be, and that's my big gripe with this. There are a handful of scenes in here that just don't even need to be in this film. There's a scene where Lois Lane is at the Daily Planet, and somebody comes up and starts asking her about a source that she has, and like, I was watching it, and I'm like, there's no reason for this scene to exist in here. There's that it delivers nothing. and you could have just cut out a minute of the unnecessary runtime there. And there are a handful of other weird choices like that. The family that we see kind of struggling to survive among all the parademons, we don't need to spend nearly as much time as we do with them. I mean, especially when they like escape and flee their home, you see a whole bunch of other people fleeing their home. You could have just had that scene to establish, hey, there are people in this area, and they're in danger. They need to get out. That's all you need. You didn't need to like revisit this household a few times throughout the movie to check in on them or anything like that. The only thing you get out of that is you get a little gag with the girl grabbing like a bug spray can, and that's not a gag worthy of the 4 or 5 extra minutes we spend with this family. Last little negative narrative structure thing I'm going to touch on. The whole thing in Atlantis with Aquaman and Mera, I believe her name is. That is effectively the Thor scenes from the Age of Ultron movie that were setting up a Thor Ragnarok that we didn't actually end up getting. The tone that is set in those scenes ends up being very different than the actual Thor Ragnarok we got. And I feel like this is what that Atlantis sequence is. This is setting up the Aquaman movie and introducing this character and introducing the fact that Aquaman has never been to Atlantis before this, and he was abandoned and just has kind of been on his own for his entire who knows how long life as a presumably god-ish type of character. It's all just a weird exposition dump that's setting up a movie that is not this movie. All of that stuff out of the way, when the team actually starts working together and they go face off down underneath the harbor, that's a fun little action sequence. And considering we've already seen so many iterations of the like fast superhero like Quicksilver, they managed to put a nice little spin on that with the Flash here is enjoyable and engaging. Bringing back Superman is weird, but it's handled quickly because it needs to be, and then they just kind of move on to the next thing. You get another great sequence there, is showing that Superman really is what this team needs because he is stronger than all of them. He can kind of take all of them on at once, and he manages just fine in that regard. There's the great moment where the Flash thinks he's got the upper hand, and then Superman like turns his eye and head while Flash is going through super speed, and Flash like trips over himself and gets all flustered. That's great sequence there. And I think story-wise, my favorite element of this film is actually the fact that Batman and Wonder Woman are resisting the urge to step up and be a leader to this team. Batman is very much worn down. He's been doing this for 20 years. He's ready to call it. He's ready to walk away from it all, it seems. He's worn down, he's beaten down, but he's doing it because nobody else can step up and do it. But he still doesn't want to lead the team. He's worked alone so long, he doesn't know how to work on a team. Wonder Woman, on the other hand, basically, when the last time she worked on a team, it didn't end well for her personally, and so she retreated. And this film is very much about her coming back into that leadership role. But neither of them have enough faith in themselves, so they both put that faith into Superman coming in and being the leader, and that's what eventually will happen. I think my favorite gag in the whole film is the Aquaman lasso sequence where he starts going off and talking about how he doesn't want to die, but they're gonna die, and he starts talking about the weaknesses of everybody, and then he turns to Wonder Woman and is like, "You're gorgeous, I don't want to die, I don't want to do this," and then he starts everybody kind of realizes he's sitting on the lasso. It's a great little moment and use of that plot device effectively to kind of give us a little bit of insight into Aquaman, who's mostly just been kind of bro, yeah, like a bat, ha, I dig it, kind of stuff all throughout this film. And so we get a nice little scene of him being vulnerable but still strong in his vulnerability. The whole end sequence, there's a nice contrast there. It certainly gets into dark, dreary, reds and all the stuff you see in the trailers, but as soon as Superman comes into the fight in the end, and you have the team working together, that's when you start to really see the colors of everybody pop. Superman's blue really pops against the red background of everything around him. Even the Flash's red kind of stands out as its own thing in that scenario. And the back and forth between the Flash and Superman in their race to save people, that's great. The mid-credit sequence race is pitch perfect, and that's what these characters should have always been. The Superman who's joking with Barry about brunch is just a great scene, and it's fun, and it's what this universe that they've been building has been missing. We've been so downtrodden and somber and morose that when we finally get to see the joy that these characters can have with one another, all throughout this kind of end chunk, it resonates, it stands out, and it's what this whole universe has been missing. And then lastly, you have the end credits tease with Lex Luthor having broken out, and he's just off on a yacht somewhere, and he invites Deathstroke, and they start talking about how Superman is putting his own team together, and I want to scream at the screen and say, no, you put that team together. You're the one that had already done all the research and brought them all together. But whatever. That's another sequence where they've just kind of forgotten that Lex had all that information on everybody because they needed to get that information out in Batman v Superman. Anyway, so they kind of tease Legion of Doom, and yeah, where this film ends, as I said in my spoiler-free review, where this film ends is a good place. It took a lot of nonsense to get there, but it's ending in one of the brightest places that any of these films have ended, in terms of looking ahead to the future of these franchises. And then lastly, I want to touch on, the fact that, sure, I can nitpick this apart, and critics can, and whatnot, and everything. I went and saw this on a Monday night at a 7 o'clock screening, and when the credits started to roll, audience applauded. We didn't have that when I saw it opening night, but it happened tonight, and I was like, you know what? Good on them. It leaves me with a smile on my face. Takes a long ways to get there, especially if you throw in all the other films, but it satisfied that crowd. It leaves me, in a not devastated and miserable place like some of the other films have. So good on Justice League. So those are my spoiler-filled thoughts of Justice League. Let me know what you thought about the film in the comments below. As always, I've been your host, Trevor Starkey from TrevorTrove.com. You can follow me at SnarkyStarkey on Twitter. And until next time, from here at the Trove, treasure your friends.